Hello, and welcome to another episode of Panthera TV. Today is the 18th anniversary of Endangered Species Day and the 50th anniversary of the Endangered Species Act. My name is Phil Ratuda, social media and campaign lead here at Panthera. Each day, thousands of species face habitat destruction, poaching, conflict with humans, and amidst this decline in biodiversity, several wildcat species stand at the brink of extinction. Today, our conversation with three experts will cover the challenges facing small cat species, including tigers, leopards, and lions. We'll also discuss Panthera's on-the-ground solutions and the steps necessary to ensure the survival of these endangered species. We have a fantastic panel of scientists lined up. We have Dr. John Goodrich, Panthera's chief scientist, Dr. Abhishek Harihar, the director of Panthera's Tiger Program, and Dr. Marina Druidi, Regional Carnivore Monitoring Coordinator for West and Central Africa. Now, if you have any question for these experts, please share it as a comment across any of our social channels, and we'll do our best to actually respond to it. Now, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. John Goodrich, our Chief Scientist. Hey, John, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks, Phil. I'm Panthera's Chief Scientist. I oversee and help to develop the science that we use to help us protect wild cats.
Awesome. So to start, today's Endangered Species Day, and a lot of people are wondering what exactly is IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and what is IUCN Red List for threatened and endangered species?
Yeah, so the IUCN is a union of conservation organizations from both government and civil society. So Panthera is a member, many governments are members, and we all try to collaborate and work together to protect wild species. The IUCN maintains what they call the Red List of Endangered Species, which is it's a list that evaluates species conservation status and rates them on a continuum from least concerned all the way down to extinct. And in the middle, you have least concerned, non-threatened, vulnerable, endangered, critically endangered, and then extinct. And they also have a newer, more forward-looking green status assessment that tracks species progress towards recovery. So the red list, you're looking at species going extinct. Green status assessment tracks the recovery of those species. They sound kind of similar, but it's a really important and very different mindset, whether you're trying to stop extinction or whether you're actually trying to recover a species and increase their numbers.
That's great info, especially for people who aren't aware of the IUCN. Now, several species of wildcats are classified as endangered by the IUCN. As an expert in wildcat conservation, it would be interesting to hear your perspective on the global challenges facing these species. What do you think are the biggest obstacles to their survival, and what do you think what can be done to overcome these challenges?
Yeah, so all wildcats face three main threats. And the first one is overharvest, which is mostly poaching or illegal trade, but some cats are illegally hunted. And in many cases, that legal hunting is not sustainable. The second threat is habitat loss and fragmentation. And, so this might be from urban and suburban expansion, but especially occurs from industrial agriculture and unsustainable logging practices. So industrial agriculture, think things like oil palm plantations, soybean plantations, where forests are cleared for these agricultural plantations. And then fragmentation especially occurs with the development of linear infrastructure. So we're talking highways, railways, these things that cut through wild habitats and fragment them, create two different sections that animals have different difficulty traveling between. Then the third threat is human-cat conflict. Cats are predators, and wherever cats and people overlap, cats end up killing livestock, they end up killing our pets, and sometimes they even attack people.
Yeah.
And then for all these reasons, people kill cats in retaliation. And then last, there's climate change, which is sort of this big existential threat, but affects
Mhm.
cats indirectly in as much as it affects all of the three threats that I just mentioned. But in some cases, we can expect very significant changes in habitat due to climate change. So, if we're talking about snow leopards, for example, that live in these very high elevation habitats in the Himalayas, we're seeing those habitats shrink as the climate warms. High elevation, glaciers are melting, that sort of thing, and forests are expanding upwards in elevation.
Thank you. So I know you're going to talk about the solutions in a bit, but for now, can you give us an overview of how many of the seven big cat species are classified as endangered?
Only tigers of the seven big cats are
Yeah.
classified as endangered, but we've got several subspecies of other big
Mhm.
cat species that are also endangered or even critically endangered. So there's several leopard subspecies that are endangered. For example, the Javan leopard in Indonesia,
Yeah.
two lion subspecies that are endangered, two cheetah subspecies, and even the Florida panther in the United States.
Yeah. Even here in the U.S. Huh?
Yeah.
So as for lesser known small cat species, which species are endangered, and why do you think they're endangered, and what is Panthera doing to protect them?
So we've got the Andean cat, Andean mountain cat, the Bornean bay cat, the flat-headed cat, and the Iberian lynx. The trouble with small cats is that we know so little about them. They're very not well-studied animals. So the
Mhm.
IUCN assessments are often based more on existing habitat and where we expect cats to be, rather than on-the-ground surveys of cat numbers. So that is, if there's good habitat, we expect cats to be there. We can estimate how many cats we should expect to be there. But what we find is often when we actually do on the ground surveys for the first time of those habitats, that the cats just aren't there.
Mhm.
Um, and that's a sure sign that they're being poached out. You've got good habitat, there's no cats, cats have been poached out and or their prey have been poached out. But even when we know very little about a species, we can still protect it because we know their basic needs. They need large patches of protected, undisturbed habitat where they aren't being persecuted by humans. They need abundant prey.
Yeah. So, I mean, you before becoming the chief scientist, you were the director of the Tiger program. So, when reflecting on the history of Panthera's Tiger program and the state of tiger conservation when you first began, it's always important to consider the progress that has been made. So, as chief scientist now, perhaps you could discuss the significant strides that have been made to protect tigers and their habitats, as well as whatever work remains.
Sure. So I've been a part of Panthera's Tiger program ever since Panthera was founded in 2006, and I directed the program from 2012 through 2022. And that, the first decade of the 21st century was a really bad time for tigers.
Hmm.
We saw tiger numbers plummeting. We lost tigers from Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos um, in that first 10 years of the 21st century. And so when we started Panthera's Tiger program in 2006, it was a pretty desperate situation. There was estimated only about 3,200 tigers left in the wild, and especially in Southeast Asia, populations were really plummeting. And I was based in Southeast Asia at that time. We realized right from the beginning that stopping the decline of tiger numbers was not enough.
Hmm.
We needed to increase tiger numbers. We needed, if we were going to secure a future for the species, we needed more tigers in the wild.
Hmm.
That's why right from the start we set this goal that we would increase tiger numbers by at least 50% in any site that we engaged in. That was and still is the goal of Panthera's Tiger program.
Hmm.
And so far as I know, we were the first organization to ever do that, to set a goal of recovering tigers, of actually increasing the numbers. Everyone else at that time was, their goals were stated in terms of we're going to stop the decline of tigers in the wild. And so it was a pivotal moment in tiger conservation. So, think about it. It's like running a business with the intent to break even or the intent to turn a profit.
Mm.
A very different mindset. And when we created that goal of increasing tiger numbers, it created a very different mindset where we wanted more tigers. Maybe we weren't going to increase tigers by 50%, but likely we would get some level of increase. Since then, almost all conservation organizations, government and non-government, have switched to a goal of increasing tiger numbers. T times 2, or doubling tiger numbers, is a popular one that many people are probably familiar with. And since that time, we've really worked out, we being not just Panthera, but conservation organizations at large, really worked out the formula for tiger conservation. We know what works.
Yeah.
Tigers need large protected spaces. They need to be protected from poaching and human persecution. And if they're left alone like that, they reproduce really well and they recover. And so today, we just last year reassessed the global tiger population for the IUCN Red List. We estimate there's 4,500 tigers left in the wild now. And at roughly 70% of the sites that Panthera is engaged in since 2006, we've increased tiger numbers, and in some of those sites by over 400%. So tigers are still endangered. We still have a lot of challenges ahead of us, but we're definitely not out of the woods yet. But we've made tremendous progress over the past 15 years, and most importantly, we know the formula for conservation. We know how to do it.
Gotcha. Well, John, thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon. We'll answer some questions. But next up, we have Dr. Abhishek Hawahar, who will explain more about the Tiger programs. He's currently our Tiger Program Director. Hey, Abhishek, how you doing? Oh, can you hear me? Uh-oh. Yeah, Abhishek, are you able to hear me? Uh-oh. Are you muted? You might have a poor connection, Abhishek. Yeah, we'll get back to you, Abhishek. I think so. We'll talk to Maureen next. So Abhishek, we'll get back to you in a bit. Let's see here. Hi, Maureen. How you doing?
Hi. Hello, everyone. I'm good, thanks. I'm Maureen, and I'm the regional coordinator for West and Central Africa for carnivore monitoring for Panthera.
Oh, nice. And you're where are you based out of?
So at the moment, I'm in Cape Town, South Africa.
Oh, nice. So let's talk about the work that you've done. So you primarily, you work with big cats, of course. So let's talk about leopards. So of the leopard populations you work with, which are endangered and why?
Yeah, so leopards have a broad geographic range and they are very adaptable. But these aspects have contributed to the misconception that the species might not be severely threatened across its range. But that's not the case, and the leopard is probably the most persecuted cat in the world. So there are several subspecies and regional populations that are endangered, and leopards have lost a great proportion of their range. And if we take the example of West Africa, where I'm currently working, leopards have lost between 86 and 95% of their historical range. The main reasons include the poaching of their prey species, but also the direct killing of leopards. It's like notably for the trade and the use of their body parts that have a high cultural value in many belief systems across the region and across Africa in general. And habitat loss and fragmentation is also an important threat for the species because the populations are becoming smaller and more isolated from one another. So that's also an issue. And in West Africa, there's another type of threat that has emerged in the last decades, notably in the northern part of the region. It's violent extremism. That has major consequences for the conservation of wildlife species, including leopards. And there are some parks which are really the last strongholds for leopards and for other carnivores and species in the region that now have to be abandoned by their management staff because of security risk. So this is a real issue for wildlife and also for the communities living around those parks, you know.
Yeah, I gotcha. I mean, we want, of course, increase their numbers. Speaking of increasing numbers, can we talk about a little bit about the Arabian leopard, its status, and
Yeah, sure. So there are 9 subspecies of leopards that are recognized by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, so the IUCN. And there are 3 species that are classified as critically endangered. Those are the Amur leopard, the Arabian leopard, and the Indo-Chinese leopard. So the Arabian leopard historically occupied most of the Arabian Peninsula, but they experience about like 98% of range reduction. And apart from the Dhofar Mountains in Oman, their distribution is really unknown. Although we know that they persist in Yemen, the scientists that are studying the subspecies know of about 50 individuals in Oman, but the population size is unknown in Yemen due to the ongoing instability there. And in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the last sighting of leopard was in 2014. And since 2020, Pantera has been conducting camera trap surveys in the country, and there's no leopard that has been detected. And we got more than 1 million of pictures and no leopards, you know. So that strongly suggests that the Arabian leopard has been extirpated from the country.
Yeah.
And Pantera surveys, you know, they have also highlighted the substantial habitat loss, degradation due to urbanization, agriculture, road networks, also intensive livestock grazing, depression of wild prey species, especially the large ones that would be the food of leopards. And also there was a lot of, you know, direct persecution of leopard, and that was also a critical threat for the subspecies. That was mostly due to retaliatory killing in response to real or to perceived livestock depredation. But I'm not just going to be saying bad things. Like, there's also really hope, and to restore leopard habitat and their prey, and also to create areas where leopards could be reintroduced in the wild. Pantera and the Royal Commission for Alula have developed the Arabian Leopard Initiative in 2020. And so Pantera is now involved in supporting efforts to prepare sites for the reintroduction of Arabian leopards and for the ongoing captive breeding to prepare leopards to then be released into the wild. So we have some hope for Arabian leopards to roam the kingdom again very soon.
That's really good news for sure.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about habitats. You're based in Africa. So how does rainforest loss in Africa contribute to the status of leopards?
Yeah, so rainforest loss and fragmentation is actually a major threat for leopards in tropical Africa. This threat is particularly important in West Africa, where the Upper Guinean forest is one of the most critically fragmented regions in the world. So today there's about, I think it's only 10% of the original dense forest cover that remains. And as a result, you know, leopards are losing their food source, their habitat, and the populations are becoming severely fragmented, which can pose issues in terms of genetic diversity. So those forests they also host more than a quarter of Africa's mammals. So many species are impacted on top of leopards. And in Central Africa, in the Congo Basin, it's a biodiversity hotspot in the world. It's home to thousands of species, and it's the second largest tropical rainforest on the planet after the Amazon. So it's very important. And this forest system is home to lots of endangered species. So you've got the western lowland gorilla, the forest elephant, chimpanzee, mandrill, giant pangolin. So habitat loss and fragmentation due to human encroachment, but also palm oil plantations and logging concessions is really threatening all those species and leopards. And the biggest threat for leopards also in those forests, it's probably hunting. Hunters are using snares to catch different species, small ungulates, and leopards can become bycatch, or they can be targeted, through illegal hunting for their fur and their body parts. And as a result, these leopards have disappeared from several areas in Central Africa.
Thank you. So John had mentioned subspecies that are endangered. You've been involved with our work with West African lions. Can you tell us more about their critically endangered status, and how is that status improving in the Niokolo-Koba National Park in Senegal?
Yes, that's a great question. I like talking about those lions. So lions in Africa, they're in a very precarious state. The situation is particularly dire in West Africa, where the species has lost 99% of its historical range, and it's therefore listed as critically endangered. So the next step means the species disappear. So it's very important. So there are some countries like Ghana and Ivory Coast that have lost their lion populations in the last 15, 20 years. And so today there are only 3 protected areas that still have lions. So it's in the region. So it's Niokolo-Koba National Park in Senegal, the WAP complex that is between Benin, Burkina Faso, and Niger, and Kenji Lake in Nigeria. And so the total number of lions for the region is estimated to be between 180 and 257 lions. So it's very small. But once again, there is some hope. And so since 2017 in Niokolo-Koba National Park, lion numbers have doubled to 30,
awesome.
30 individuals, thanks to the collective effort of the Senegal Department of National Park, called DPN, and Panthera. And so we have been reinforcing anti-poaching patrols and scientific monitoring. And so now, as a result, both lions and some of their prey species are rebounding. And a good illustration of this that you have probably seen if you're like a follower of Panthera on social media, it's the case of the lioness called Florence. So she was the first lioness and the first lion in general to be collared by the Panthera Senegal team in 2021. And after 2 years of monitoring Florence and her activities, her movement, her GPS collar stopped functioning. And we were all very worried that Florence had been killed, by poachers, or sometimes it happens by a male lion or by a buffalo. But in fact, Florence was denning. And last March, our lion scientists in Senegal found Florence on one of the cameras that they had deployed in the park to look for her. And she had 3 cubs with her. So this is a great sign, of species recovery in Niokolo-Koba National Park. And but the work is not finished because, Panthera scientists think that the park could support between 190 and 240 lions, which is the current number of lions for the whole of West Africa. So that means we have a lot of work still. But the lion population there is recovering. So this is really positive.
So last question, how do you think the rebounding lion populations affects the role of leopards and small cats in the habitats in which all of them coexist?
Yeah, so lions are large apex predators. That means that they are at the top of the food chain. So in places where they were extirpated, so in places where they disappeared, leopards would probably have become the apex predator.
Mhm.
Maybe we've spotted hyenas. So if lions come back, I think they will simply claim back their role, and their position as apex predators in the area.
Uh-huh.
And so leopards and small cat species might well change their behavior, notably their activity patterns and their habitat use, to avoid the threat that is posed by this larger competitor in their environment. So they will have to readapt to the coming back of this large new predator. But in Africa, in many national parks, you have lions, leopards, smaller cat species such as caracals and servals that are all coexisting, and they have strategies to do so. So we should not be too worried about that.
Well, that's good. That's positive news for sure. Well, Maureen, thank you so much for joining us. We'll get back to you at the end. But
Sure.
now I would like to introduce Dr. Abhishek Harahar. Abhishek, how you been? Abhishek is our new Tiger director. So yeah, how are you?
I'm doing good, thank you. Sorry about the.
Oh no worries. I know it's late. It's late where you are.
Oh no, that's okay. Yeah. So hi, I'm just a quick introduction. I'm Abhishek. I'm Panthers Tiger Program Director. I'm based in Bangalore in India. It's close to 8 o'clock.
Yeah, I know.
So nice to join all of you.
So you work with tigers, and tigers have been included on the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species since the first assessment in 1986. Why have they always been endangered?
So I think, to start off, tigers are certainly one of the most iconic species, most recognized. Everyone knows tigers. So everyone's always been concerned about tigers, forever. So there's been a lot of attention on the species. But their precarious state has kind of been known since, the turn of the 20th century, for instance. And tigers before that were hunted out extensively as vermin, as species in conflict, especially in most of Asia, which was in the late 1800s and early 1900s, were all under colonial rule. And there was sport hunting and a whole lot of other reasons why tigers were persecuted. But around about the early 20th century, tiger range had contracted really, really steep. In fact, tigers are now occurring in just about 7% of their historic range, the contraction of over 90%. Some estimates say that there were probably about 100,000 tigers in the turn of the century, and we now have about 4,500 tigers. So that's a steep decline. Yeah. And all of this has kind of led to tigers always being endangered. The fact that they've lost a lot of space, they lost a lot of range, they've lost a lot out in terms of numbers, and that's always been the case. And as John said, in just the last few decades, at the turn of 2000s, we still lost tigers from many countries, especially in mainland Southeast Asia. But even before that, in the turn of around the 1900s, we lost tigers from Java, from Bali, from Singapore, the Caspian region. So tigers have always been, on a
precarious.
Precarious. Yeah. So I think that's why tigers have remained endangered since 1986. But that said, although there is hope and tigers probably can do better soon, we still have about 1 million square kilometers of potential tiger habitat still out there without tigers in them. So, there's a great scope for recovery. But what it also shows, as John mentioned, is, tigers are still being poached out. So the threats still exist, and that still keeps tigers as endangered on the IUCN Red List.
Still, can you talk about the IUCN's latest positive update on the conservation status of tigers?
Yeah, I think the recent IUCN assessment led by John was actually for the first time in all these assessments a ray of hope, because we were slowly starting to see numbers either stabilizing or at least numbers recovering in some small sites across the range. So there is hope certainly, and that's great. But John wrote an article a few years ago, a few months ago, where he
Yeah.
said, although we're seeing these recoveries, we have to take it as cautious optimism. And I kind of I can't state that enough. So the thing with that is that although tigers are doing well in parts of South Asia, parts of Far East Asia, they aren't doing as well in Southeast Asia. So tigers are not doing well everywhere. So that still has them in danger. The other thing that happened about 12 years ago or 13 years ago in 2010, the governments of all the tiger range countries came together and to pledge their commitments to recovering tigers, to doubling tiger numbers, in fact.
Yeah.
And that really mobilized government support for tiger conservation. And one thing that it did was to improve the way we monitor and count tigers. So a lot of what we've learned about tiger numbers and tiger range has improved a lot in the last decade. And that has actually helped us kind of understand what tiger numbers are right now. So although we do have a good number and it looks a little higher than previous, there is a great chance that previous estimates were underestimates as well. And what we have now is probably a more robust and at least a closer estimate to what is probably the reality. But again, as I said, the cautious optimism comes from the fact that we still have the threats and they haven't really gone away. But one thing that has happened over the last 12 years is, we've seen that governments, NGOs, and communities can come together for innovative conservation solutions for the species. So that's been still optimistic. Yeah, that's still possible.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have to work together. So, I mean, as director of the Tiger Program, what are Panthera's conservation goals for tigers in the sites in which we work?
Yeah. So I think, as again John mentioned it, the Tiger Program in Panthera is called Tigers Forever, and it's basically a recovery program. The whole thing about it is about species recovery, and the goal that we have is a 50% increase in 10 years at the sites we work in. And again, as John said, it's a very unique position to have taken, almost a decade and 1.5 decades ago, that we actually said that we're not just going to stop the decline, but we're actually going to recover tigers. So I think that's a big step, and that remains our goal even now. And basically what that means is securing sites, making sure that the conditions for tigers are good and that they can recover. And that's basically what the goal is where we work. We just make sure that tigers recover. They're secure and they recover. Yeah.
So speaking of the Tigers Forever program, how is the Tigers Forever program building on recent progress and working towards rebounding tiger populations?
Yeah, I think, again, just repeating what John said, we know what works for tigers. We know what works for most cats, and as in we, in the sense, again, the larger conservation community. And the whole thing is about finding large patches of land which are suitable for the species, that need to be secure from unnatural deaths. So basically, no poaching of tigers should occur within them. Those sites should have the protection infrastructure, the capacity, the will to actually protect those places. Sometimes it really needs political will to make sure that things stay safe. But also you need to have enough prey that can support a resident population of tigers and not just tigers coming in and going out. But also connectivity across larger landscapes, because you don't want to just see tigers recover and stay in isolated patches. You want them to be connected across populations, and that connectivity is critical because you have genetic exchange. You make sure that there's no inbreeding, and that tigers can actually live on in perpetuity. But in addition to that, it's also critical because we're working with landscapes that are connected, that are often not protected as well, where tigers have to move. We also have to be building local community constituencies for conservation and working with them, especially, again, making sure that there's no conflict, or at least reduced conflict, or acceptable levels of conflict is a critical part of what we should do. But again, building on what we know about tigers and where we need to be, again, the recent IUCN assessment has shown that Southeast Asia is a focus area, and so a lot of what our tiger program is doing is to have the focus in Southeast Asia, countries in Thailand and Malaysia where we work more closely, and in several other countries where we work with partners to ensure that tigers are doing well.
So last year, your colleague, Dr. Goodrich, said that if we continue our progress, tigers could be upgraded from endangered to vulnerable in the not so distant future. As a new program director of the Tiger program, what is your outlook?
I agree. I think it is a time to be hopeful. I think we have reached that point where we are seeing, as I said, we are seeing governments, NGOs, and communities come together for innovative solutions. So we really are there in terms of turning the tide for the species, and it'll be great to see tigers move from endangered to vulnerable in the next few years, maybe a decade or so. But we have to be careful that change is a change that's really that's really a population change, and we're really seeing tigers doing well and therefore being uplisted. And again, this is where it's critical that whatever we do, we evaluate, we monitor, we keep a close eye on how we're doing, but ensure that the change that we are wanting to achieve and the change that we want to have in the next 5 years is based on real data, real science, and information that populations are doing well. And that's something that we have to be careful about.
For sure. So thank you, Abhishek, for joining us today. I'm going to bring the rest of our panelists, John and Maureen. We do have a few audience questions, so welcome back. This is for all three of you. What happens if wildcat prey species becomes endangered?
Yeah, that's a really important question. We talk a lot about poaching of wildcats themselves. But what about poaching and overharvest of their prey? But when we do talk about poaching of wild cats, in our minds, we're always thinking it's the cats themselves and it's their prey. Sometimes the cats themselves are being targeted. Sometimes the prey are being targeted. Sometimes both are being targeted. But even when prey are being poached, cats end up stepping in those snares and whatnot. But obviously, cats need prey to survive. They need food to survive, and the more diverse your prey populations, the better off you are. So poaching of prey is essentially just as bad of a problem, in some cases worse of a problem than poaching cats themselves. I think Maureen being in Africa and Abhishek being in Asia can add a lot of specifics to that, because Asia and Africa are really where the bushmeat poaching problem, as we call it, is a huge problem.
Abhishek, Maureen, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, again, as John mentioned, I think losing prey is really a big problem, and we face that across a lot of the sites. And in fact, recovering prey before we can recover tigers in the sites we work in is often tougher than just recovering prey. So if you have a good prey base, the tiger numbers can bounce back really quickly, and that's makes it pretty easy for us to work on conservation programs in such situations. But at sites where we have prey densities that are really low and they're being poached out as well, often we find it much tougher to work towards recovering those species and then initiate tiger recoveries or any cat species recovery. So it does become quite difficult, and we face this across most parts of tiger range that we work in.
Marie?
Yeah, well, exactly like what was said before. So if prey disappear, and then you're going to have, like, the big cats are going to disappear, and also you will have to then reintroduce prey first before reintroduce wildcats. So instead of having a reintroduction program for one species, which is already quite difficult, you might end up having to have a reintroduction program for 10 species, which is very challenging and requires a lot of funding. So let's not go there. Let's try to keep all the prey species for our cat species, and yeah.
Definitely. So another question here. How can I protect endangered species? Is there anything I can do in my community?
Yeah, that's another great question, and one that we get asked all the time. Um, and it, the first answer for us as an NGO, a nonprofit, we're dependent on public donations. Donate. I say that so often it's just become cliche, but we are completely dependent on public donations. That's how we protect cats. So that is very important. But there's a lot more than that you can do besides that, and especially in your home country. And I think one of the most important things is educate yourselves. And if you're watching this, obviously you're trying to do that, and we really appreciate that. Educate yourselves, become aware of what the problems are, and then use that education to influence your friends, your family, your the media stars or sports stars that you follow, and especially your government. And again, I think Maureen and Abhishek, I'm sitting here in Colorado in the United States. They probably have additional perspectives on what they can do to, or what people can do to help out.
Abhishek, Maureen?
Yeah, if I can go. So again, I would say some of the easy ways to help us out is with time and your time and effort and money. Of course, it's often difficult to find volunteering opportunities for people at sites, but that doesn't mean that you don't exist. And coming down to site, helping teams out, or even helping teams in other ways, and with your time is certainly a big thing. But again, if any of you are from cat range countries, tiger range countries, just ensuring that you're supporting and making sure that you have wildlife friendly consumption patterns, and that's a critical one. But also kind of involving yourself in conversations and debates that ensure that governments take a strong stand towards conservation of wild species, conservation of cats on the whole. Because at this point, that's a lot of what we need is political pressure to make sure that we're able to move forward.
For sure. Maureen?
Yeah, nothing more like try to talk about cats and the plight of cats and their conservation challenges to your friends, your community, your children. And if you're an artist, maybe you can help with drawing beautiful paintings or photography, or if you're a storyteller, you can tell stories. We really need the help of everyone, and everyone with their own knowledge and their skills can really contribute to wildcat conservation.
For sure. You guys get out there. Last question. And this applies to all three of you. How does climate change intersect with species endangerment? And specifically, how does it affect wildcats, especially within your three's expertise?
Yeah, that as I mentioned in the beginning, climate change is a tough one. It's a huge threat for cats. At the same time, we don't always know what that threat's really going to look like in 10, 20, 30 years from now. In some cases, we've done the modeling to look at what the changes are going to be, but it also depends on what people do and how people respond to climate change. But some of the things that we do know, there are some examples. I talked a little bit about snow leopards. Tigers are another example. Tigers in the Sundarbans, which are a huge mangrove swamp in India and Bangladesh, they're expected to be lost within the next few decades due to sea level rise. These mangrove swamps already flood daily with the tide changes. We expect them to be completely underwater. Just don't quite know how long. So that tiger population will be lost. On the other hand, to the north in Russia, we might see expansions of tiger habitat as the climate warms there and tiger prey start to move north, and tigers may follow them north. But there's lots of other things that can happen, and it's often about climate change or habitat change
Yeah.
due to climate change and due to the warming of the climate. And, Maureen, when we were talking about this the other day, you talked a lot about some areas in Africa where you might see significant drying and how that might impact cats and just the increased heat. But if you want to talk about that a little bit,
Yeah.
that would be great.
Yeah, no, exactly. For West Africa, it's really droughts are going to become more severe and prolonged as well. So that can be a real problem. Even if, for example, leopards don't need to drink maybe every day, but if their prey species need that, and if there's no grass cover for the herbivores to eat from, then that means there's no food for leopards. So that can really be a massive issue for wildlife, as it is for people.
Yeah. And Abhishek?
Yeah, again, I would say, John's kind of covered what might happen to tigers, at least from what we know right now. But it's the same thing. Vast parts of tropical Southeast Asia where they're mostly wet evergreen forests, but have been facing fires more frequently of late, and that is something that's again modifying the habitat, the way the forest is structured, and all of that, as both Marine and John said, changes the habitat, could change the prey assemblage and the way prey interact with the habitat as a result of these changes, and that could again affect again tigers. Again, we know some places where we are sure what's going to happen, but in some other places we still have to get the right information to tell us where it might go.
Thank you, Abhishek. And so Abhishek, Marine, John, thank you so much for joining us today. If you want to help protect endangered wildcat species, please make a donation to Panthera by either visiting panthera.org/donate, or you could scan this QR code right over here and add a donation. If you want to learn more about Panthera and wildcats, please visit panthera.org, or you could follow us on all our social channels from Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube at Panthera Cats. Thank you guys again for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Hey, thanks to everyone who's listened in. I see we've got people from all over the world.
Oh, yeah.
I really appreciate your taking the time to learn about cats.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Everyone, have a good day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.